The Arizona sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil. It was the kind of heat that made a man question every decision that brought him to this God-forsaken territory. Jim Walker wiped the sweat from his forehead and adjusted his hat lower over his eyes. The young cowboy had been riding since dawn. An Apache pass stretched out before him like a gateway to hell itself. It was 1882, and this land was as dangerous as it was beautiful. Red rocks towered on either side of the narrow pass, their shadows offering little relief from the scorching heat. Jim's horse, a sturdy mare named Penny, picked her way carefully over the rocky ground. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of brush made Jim's hand drift toward the rifle strapped to his saddle. He wasn't a fool. Everyone knew Apache Pass was dangerous territory. The Apache warriors knew every inch of these rocks, every hiding spot, every ambush point. But Jim had no choice. His small ranch was 3 days behind him, and he needed to reach Fort Bowie to collect supplies before winter came. The longer route would have added a week to his journey, and he couldn't afford that kind of time. The attack came without warning. One moment Jim was alone on the trail. The next moment something slammed into him from the side. He tumbled from his horse, hitting the ground hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. Penny whinnied and bolted, her hoofbeats echoing off the canyon walls. Jim rolled, reaching for his pistol, but a knee pressed into his chest. He looked up and saw his attacker, painted for war with a knife raised high. Time seemed to slow down. Jim's hand found his gun and he fired. The shot went wide, but it was enough to throw his attacker off balance. They grappled in the dust, rolling over rocks and through thorny brush. Jim had fought before, bar fights mostly, but this was different. This person fought with a desperation and skill that spoke of real training, real war. The knife came down again and Jim caught the wrist, holding it back with every ounce of strength he had. Then something strange happened. As they struggled, Jim's hand caught the edge of his attacker's shirt and it tore. What he saw underneath made him freeze for just a second. This wasn't a man. The Apache warrior he was fighting was a woman. That moment of shock almost cost him his life. The knife came down again, but Jim's instinct kicked in. He twisted hard, using his weight and leverage to flip them over. Now he was on top, pinning her arms down. They were both breathing hard, faces inches apart, covered in dust and sweat. She was young, maybe 20 or 25 years old. Her dark eyes blazed with fury and something else, something that looked like fear. She said something in Apache, words that came out like a curse. Then she spit in his face. Jim should have knocked her out. He should have tied her up and taken her to the fort. That's what any sensible man would do. Instead, he just stared at her, trying to make sense of what was happening. Women didn't usually fight as warriors. What was her story? What had brought her to this desperate ambush? She seemed to sense his hesitation. Her eyes darted to the side and Jim followed her gaze. His pistol had fallen a few feet away, half buried in sand. She looked back at him and he could see her thinking, calculating her chances. Then she spoke, and this time it was in English. Broken, heavily accented, but clear enough to understand. "Don't kill me, cowboy." Jim blinked. Of all the things he expected to hear, that wasn't it. He kept his grip tight on her wrists, but he didn't reach for his knife. "Why shouldn't I?" he asked. "You just tried to kill me." She struggled once more, testing his strength, then seemed to accept she couldn't break free. Her chest heaved with effort and emotion. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, almost pleading. "I give you strong sons. You let me live, I be your woman. Give you strong sons." Jim's mind reeled. Was this some kind of trick? A desperate ploy to catch him off guard? He studied her face, looking for deception, but all he saw was desperation mixed with pride. She wasn't begging exactly. It was more like she was proposing a deal, a trade, her life for her service. "That's crazy," Jim said. But even as the words left his mouth, he wasn't sure what to do. His hands were still locked around her wrists, holding her down, but now the situation felt different. This wasn't just about surviving an ambush anymore. She shook her head fiercely. "Not crazy. I am Naylin, warrior woman, strong, good fighter. Good worker. I give you sons, strong like Apache, smart like Cowboy." Jim opened his mouth to respond, but then he heard something that made his blood run cold. Hoofbeats. Many of them. And voices calling out in English. The cavalry. His head whipped around and he saw them in the distance, a patrol of maybe 6 or 7 soldiers riding hard toward the pass. They must have heard the gunshot. In a few minutes they would be here. Jim looked back at Naylin. Her eyes had gone wide, and for the first time he saw real terror there. She knew as well as he did what the cavalry would do to an Apache warrior woman. They wouldn't listen to her offer. They wouldn't care about deals or promises. At best, she would be imprisoned. At worst, well, Jim didn't want to think about that. "Please," she whispered, and that single word carried more weight than all her earlier threats and promises combined. "Please, Cowboy," Jim's mind raced. He had maybe 2 minutes to make a decision that would change everything. Turn her over to the cavalry and go on with his life as planned. Or do something incredibly stupid and claim she was his guide, his helper, someone under his protection. Every logical part of his brain screamed at him to let her go, to wash his hands of this whole situation. She had attacked him. She was the enemy. This wasn't his problem. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw something that reminded him of a trapped animal. Dangerous, yes, but also desperate. And there was something else. Something in the way she had made her offer, not as a slave but as a partner. Strange as it was, there was a kind of honor in that. The hoofbeats grew louder. Jim could hear the soldiers calling to each other now, could see the dust cloud they kicked up getting closer. He made his decision. In one swift motion, Jim released Nalan's wrists and stood up, pulling her to her feet. She looked at him in confusion, her hand instinctively moving toward her knife. "Don't," Jim said quietly. "Just follow my lead and stay quiet. Understand?" She nodded slowly, uncertainty replacing the fear in her eyes. Jim retrieved his pistol and quickly checked his appearance, trying to look like a man who had just been helping someone, not fighting for his life. He caught Penny, who hadn't run far, and waited as the cavalry patrol thundered into view. The lead soldier, a captain with a thick mustache and suspicious eyes, pulled his horse to a stop. His hand rested on his sidearm as he looked from Jim to Nalan and back again. "We heard a shot," the captain said. His eyes lingered on Nalan, taking in her Apache clothing and the weapons she carried. "What's going on here?" Jim's heart pounded, but he kept his voice steady and casual. "Nothing to worry about, Captain. Just scared off a rattlesnake. This here is Nalan. She's my guide through the pass. Knows the safe trails and water sources." The captain's eyes narrowed. "Your guide?" "She's Apache." "Yes, sir, she is. And that makes her the best guide I could ask for in Apache territory, don't you think?" The tension stretched out like a rope pulled tight. One of the other soldiers whispered something to the captain. Jim caught the words warrior and dangerous. Nalan stood perfectly still beside Jim, her face showing nothing. But Jim could feel the tension radiating from her body. She was ready to fight or run depending on what happened next. The captain studied them both for a long moment. Then surprisingly he nodded. "Keep a close eye on her, Cowboy. These are troubled times. You can't trust anyone." "I'll do that, sir. Thank you." The patrol rode off, leaving Jim and Nalan standing alone in the pass. Neither of them moved until the soldiers were completely out of sight. Then Nalan turned to look at Jim, her expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. "Why?" she asked simply. Jim didn't have a good answer. He wasn't even sure himself why he had done it. Maybe it was the desperate plea in her eyes. Maybe it was curiosity about her offer. Maybe he was just tired of being alone. "I don't know," he admitted. "But you made a promise, and I'm going to hold you to it." Nalan nodded slowly. She reached down and picked up her knife, and Jim tensed, but she simply slid it back into her belt and looked at him with those fierce, dark eyes. "I keep promise," she said. Nalan always keep promise. As they stood there in the Arizona heat, both of them dusty and exhausted from their fight, Jim realized his life had just changed in ways he couldn't begin to predict. He had saved an Apache warrior woman who had tried to kill him, and now somehow they were going to ride back to his ranch together. He looked at the path ahead and wondered if he had just made the best decision of his life or the biggest mistake. The ride back to Jim's ranch felt like the longest journey of his life. Nalan rode behind him on Penny, sitting stiff and alert, her body not quite touching his. Every time the horse stumbled or Jim shifted in the saddle, he could feel her tense up, ready to jump or fight or run. Her hand never left the knife at her belt. Jim's mind wouldn't stop racing. What had he done? He had just lied to a cavalry patrol and was now taking an Apache warrior woman back to his home. His home, the small ranch he had spent 3 years building from nothing. The place where he slept at night, where he kept his few valuable possessions, where he was supposed to be safe, and now he was bringing danger right through his front door. The sun was setting by the time they reached the edges of his property. The land here was rough but had enough water to support cattle and horses. Jim's ranch house was small, just 3 rooms made of adobe and wood, but it was solid. He had built it with his own hands, and he was proud of it. As they approached, Jim felt a new wave of uncertainty. What exactly was he supposed to do now? Invite her inside? Show her where to sleep? Offer her dinner? This wasn't like bringing home a new ranch hand. This was something else entirely, something he didn't have any experience with. He dismounted and Nalin slid off the horse immediately, putting distance between them. She stood in the yard looking around with the careful eyes of someone assessing a battlefield. Jim noticed how she positioned herself with clear sight lines in all directions, how her gaze lingered on the rifle he kept by the door. "You can come inside," Jim said, unsure of how to proceed. "It's safe." Nalin didn't move. "Where I sleep?" Jim hadn't thought that far ahead. He had 2 rooms in the house, his bedroom and a main room that served as kitchen and living space. There was also a small barn where he kept his horses and tools. "There's a room," he started to say, but Nalin cut him off. "I sleep outside. Watch for enemies." "Enemies? There's no one out here but us." She looked at him like he was a child who didn't understand the world. "Always enemies. Your people come, my people come, I watch. Keep you safe, keep me safe." Jim wanted to argue, but he realized she had a point. He had just lied to the cavalry about her. If they came back and found her sleeping in his house like a guest, that would raise questions. And if other Apache warriors found her here, well, he didn't know what they would think. "All right," he agreed, "but you need food and water. Come inside while I cook something." This time Nalin followed him, but she moved like a wild animal entering a trap. She stayed near the door, never turning her back to it, never letting Jim get between her and the exit. Her eyes scanned everything, noting the layout, the windows, the weapons. Jim tried to act normal, which was impossible given how strange this situation was. He started a fire in the stove and pulled out some dried beef and beans. His hands were shaking slightly, and he hoped she didn't notice. "You can sit," he offered, gesturing to one of the 2 chairs at his small table. Nalin shook her head. She preferred to stand, to be ready. Jim understood that instinct. He had felt it himself many times in dangerous territory. But this was his home. He wanted it to feel safe, at least. As the food cooked, an awkward silence filled the room. Jim searched for something to say, some way to break the tension. "So, Nalin," he started. "That's your name, Nalin?" "Yes." "Mean maiden." She said it with a hint of irony, as if the gentle name was a joke for someone who had just tried to kill a man. "My name's Jim. Jim Walker." She nodded but didn't respond. Her attention was focused on the world outside the window, watching the shadows lengthen as night approached. "Can I ask you something?" Jim ventured. "Why did you attack me in the pass? Were you alone?" Nalin's jaw tightened. For a moment, Jim thought she wouldn't answer. Then she spoke, her voice low and controlled. "I alone. My family dead, all dead. Soldiers came to our camp, said we break treaty. We not break treaty. We follow rules. But they come anyway." She paused, and Jim could see the pain flash across her face. "My father fight. My brothers fight. They all die. My mother, too. I only one who escape." Jim felt a knot form in his stomach. He had heard stories like this before from both sides. The wars between settlers and Apache had been brutal, full of betrayals and misunderstandings and innocent people caught in the middle. "I'm sorry," he said, and he meant it. Nalin looked at him sharply, as if trying to determine if he was mocking her. "Why you sorry?" "You not kill them?" "No, but I'm sorry it happened. That's not right, what they did to your family." She studied him for a long moment, then looked away. "Many things not right. This is way of world now. Apache lose, white man win. This is truth. It doesn't have to be that simple." "Yes, it do." Her voice was firm. "I see it with my eyes. My people dying, getting smaller. Your people growing, taking more land. In 10 years, maybe 20, no more Apache. We be gone like morning mist." The food was ready, and Jim divided it onto 2 tin plates. He offered one to Nalin, who took it but continued to stand. She ate quickly, efficiently, like someone who had gone hungry before and didn't take food for granted. "Why did you make that offer?" Jim asked. "The one about giving me sons. Why would you promise that?" Nalin swallowed her food and met his eyes. "I not want to die. I want to live. And I want children. Apache children. So our people not disappear completely. But you said you'd give me sons. That sounds like you plan to stay. Where else I go? She gestured broadly. My people, they fighting or hiding. If I go back, they make me marry old warrior or chief. I have no choice there. Here I make choice. I choose you. You not kill me when you could. That means something. Jim sat down with his own plate, trying to process what she was saying. But we don't even know each other. You tried to kill me just a few hours ago. I know you brave. You fight good. You think before you act. You lie to soldiers to protect me. You bring me to your home. This tell me what kind of man you are. She paused, then added, maybe you stupid man, but you good man. Despite everything, Jim almost laughed. Yeah, I'm probably pretty stupid for bringing you here. Yes, Nalin agreed without hesitation. Very stupid. They finished eating in silence. When they were done, Nalin handed her plate back to Jim and moved toward the door. I sleep in barn. Tomorrow I work. I help with ranch. This part of promise, you don't have to work tomorrow. You should rest. She shook her head firmly. I not weak, I work. You see I worth keeping. Before Jim could respond, she was gone, slipping out into the darkness like a shadow. He watched from the window as she made her way to the barn. True to her word, she didn't go inside to sleep. Instead, she climbed up onto the roof where she could see in all directions. She sat cross-legged, perfectly still, and Jim realized she really was going to stand watch all night. He cleaned up the dishes and tried to convince himself to go to bed, but sleep felt impossible. His mind kept replaying the day's events. The ambush, the fight, the cavalry, the ride home. Each decision he had made felt both right and completely insane at the same time. What would people say when they found out? The nearest neighbors were miles away, but news traveled in the territory. Eventually someone would see Nalin, would ask questions. What would he tell them? That she was his guide? His hired help? His wife? That last thought made him stop cold. She had offered to be his woman, to give him children. Was that really what he wanted? He was only 26 years old. He had thought about marriage, sure, but he had always imagined meeting some nice girl at a town dance or a church social, not taking in an Apache warrior who had tried to stab him. But there was something about Nalin that he couldn't ignore. Her strength, her directness, her survival instinct. She wasn't like any woman he had ever met. She was fierce and proud and completely unafraid to speak her mind. And despite everything, despite the violence and the danger and the absolute insanity of this situation, Jim found himself respecting her. He moved to the window again and looked out at the barn. Nalin was still there on the roof, a dark silhouette against the starlit sky. As he watched, she turned her head slightly and he realized she was looking back at the house. Looking at him, they stared at each other across the distance, two people from different worlds, brought together by chance and desperation and a split-second decision in Apache Pass. Jim didn't know what the future held. He didn't know if this arrangement would last a day or a year or a lifetime. He didn't know if he had saved Nalin's life or made the biggest mistake of his own. But as he finally turned away from the window and headed to his bed, one thing was certain. His life would never be the same again. The quiet, solitary existence he had built for himself was over. Now he had made a choice, had accepted a promise, and there was no going back. In the barn, Nalin continued her watch, her eyes scanning the darkness for threats. But part of her attention remained on the house, on the light that glowed in the window, on the cowboy who had spared her life. She had made her offer expecting to die. When he agreed, when he lied to the soldiers and brought her home, she had been as surprised as he was. Now she had to keep her promise. She had to prove she was worth the risk he had taken. But more than that, she realized she wanted to keep her promise. This strange cowboy with the kind eyes and the foolish courage, he was different from what she expected. Maybe, just maybe, there was a future here. Not just survival, but something. Jim woke to the sound of chopping wood. For a moment he was confused, still caught between sleep and waking. Then he remembered everything. Nalin, the promise, the impossible situation he had gotten himself into. He dressed quickly and stepped outside to find Nalin already hard at work. She had found his axe and was splitting logs with practiced efficiency. Her movements were precise and powerful, each swing landing exactly where she intended. A sizable pile of split wood already sat beside her. "Morning," Jim called out, feeling awkward. Nalin paused and looked at him. Her hair was tied back, and in the early morning light Jim noticed things he hadn't seen before. A scar on her left shoulder, calluses on her hands that spoke of hard work, the lean, muscular build of someone who had spent their life outdoors surviving. "Morning," she replied, then went back to chopping. Jim watched her for a moment, impressed despite himself. "You don't have to do that. I can handle the wood. I tell you, I work. This is part of promise." There was no arguing with that tone. Jim recognized stubbornness when he heard it. He had plenty of it himself. "All right, I'll get breakfast started." "You must be hungry." Nolan set down the axe and followed him inside, but this time she seemed slightly less tense. She still positioned herself near the door, but she didn't look quite so ready to bolt at any moment. Over the next few weeks, a strange routine developed between them. Nolan worked from sunrise to sunset, taking on every task Jim gave her and then finding more work to do on her own. She fixed fences, tended to the horses, hunted for fresh meat, and even started a small garden near the house using seeds Jim had been too busy to plant himself. What surprised Jim most was how skilled she was at everything. She could track a rabbit across rocky ground where Jim saw nothing. She could predict weather changes by reading the clouds and the wind. She knew which plants were edible and which ones could be used for medicine. One afternoon, Jim was struggling to calm down a horse that had gotten spooked by a rattlesnake. The animal was thrashing and pulling at its rope, and Jim was worried it would hurt itself. Nolan appeared beside him without a sound. She made a soft clicking noise with her tongue and approached the horse slowly, speaking to it in Apache. Her voice was gentle, soothing, completely different from the harsh warrior's tone she usually used. The horse's ears pricked forward. It stopped thrashing and watched her warily. Nolan continued speaking, her hands moving in slow, non-threatening gestures. Within minutes, the horse had calmed completely, allowing her to check its legs for injuries. "How did you do that?" Jim asked, amazed. "Apache grow up with horses. We understand them. They understand us." She patted the horse's neck gently. "He not hurt, just scared. Fear make everyone act crazy." Jim thought about that statement for a moment. "Is that why you attacked me in the pass? You were scared?" Nolan's hand stilled on the horse's neck. She didn't look at him when she answered. "Not scared of you. Scared of dying alone. Scared of having no purpose. When my family die, I have nothing. No reason to live. So I decide I fight until I die. At least die like warrior. But you didn't die. No, you saved me. So now I have new purpose. Keep promise. Make family again. Different family, but still family." The honesty in her words caught Jim off guard. He had been thinking of their arrangement as temporary, as something that would eventually end once Nolan figured out where she really wanted to be. But she was thinking long-term. She was planning a future here. That realization should have scared him. Instead, it made him feel something else. Hope, maybe, or possibility. As the days passed, they began to communicate better. Nolan's English improved rapidly, and Jim learned a few words of Apache. They weren't exactly friends, but they weren't strangers anymore either. Something was building between them, something neither of them knew quite how to name. One evening, Jim came back from checking the cattle to find Nolan sitting outside the house, working on something with her hands. As he got closer, he saw she was weaving a basket from dried grass and willow branches. "What's that for?" he asked. "For storing food. Winter coming soon. Need baskets for dried meat and corn." Jim sat down beside her, watching her fingers work the materials together in an intricate pattern. "That's beautiful. Where did you learn to do that?" "My mother teach me. She say Apache woman must know how to make baskets, how to tan hides, how to prepare food. She say these skills keep family alive when hunting is bad." It was the first time Nolan had voluntarily mentioned her mother. Jim sensed there was more she wanted to say, so he waited quietly. "She was good woman," Nolan continued, her hands never stopping their work. "Strong, patient, she lose 2 babies before my brother's born. It make her sad, but she not give up. She say Apache woman must be strong, must survive anything. She sounds like an amazing person." She was. Nolan's voice caught slightly. "Last thing she say to me when soldiers come, she tell me run. She tell me survive. She tell me find way to live even if everyone else die. So this what I do. I survive. I find you. I keep living." Jim felt a lump form in his throat. He understood loss. His own parents had died when he was young, killed by fever. That's why he had come west, trying to build something new, trying to find a purpose in this harsh land. "I think your mother would be proud of you," he said quietly. "You did what she asked. You survived." Nalin looked at him, and for the first time he saw tears glistening in her eyes. But she blinked them away quickly, returning her attention to the basket. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Jim realized that this moment right here felt more peaceful than any he had experienced in years. The next morning, Nalin surprised him again. She approached him while he was saddling his horse for a ride to check the fence line. "I come with you," she said. "Two people see more than one. And if trouble come, better to have help." Jim nodded, grateful for the company. They rode out together, and Nalin showed him things he had never noticed before. She pointed out signs of coyotes that had been prowling near the cattle. She found a spring he didn't know existed, hidden behind some rocks. She identified tracks of deer, rabbits, and even a mountain lion that had passed through recently. "This is good land," she observed. "Water, grass, animals. You choose well." It wasn't easy finding it. Took me months of searching before I found this spot. Apache know this place. We call it place where deer come to drink. Old hunting ground. She paused, then added, "But now it's your home. And my home too." That simple statement, "my home too," struck Jim deeply. Nalin wasn't just working here or staying here temporarily. She was claiming this place as her own. She was putting down roots. As they worked together repairing a section of fence, Jim found himself studying her. She was so different from what he had expected. Yes, she was fierce and capable of violence, he had seen that firsthand. But she was also patient, skilled, and thoughtful. She worked hard without complaining. She kept her promises, and she was beautiful. Not in the delicate way of the town girls Jim had known, but in a strong, natural way, like the land itself, harsh but honest. "Nalin," he said suddenly, "I've been thinking about your offer, your promise." She stopped working and turned to face him, her expression guarded. "What about it?" "I want you to know that I don't expect anything from you that you're not ready to give. I know you made that promise to save your life, but I'm not going to hold you to it if you want to leave." Nalin's eyes narrowed. "You want me to leave?" "No. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. I just want you to know that you have a choice. You're not a prisoner here. You can stay as long as you want, and if you want to leave, you can leave." For a long moment, Nalin just stared at him. Then unexpectedly, she smiled. It was the first real smile he had seen from her, and it transformed her face completely. "You strange man, Jim Walker. You save enemy. You give her home. Now you say she can leave if she want." She shook her head. "I not want to leave. I tell you I keep promise. I mean it. But why? We barely know each other. I know enough. You good man. You work hard. You treat me with respect, not like slave or prisoner. You share food, share home. This enough for me." She stepped closer to him, her expression serious. "And I tell you something else. I starting to think maybe this not just about keeping promise anymore. Maybe this about something more." Jim's heart raced. "What do you mean?" "I mean, maybe we build something real here. Not just Apache woman and white man living together because we have to, but real partnership, real family someday." Before Jim could respond, Nalin turned back to the fence and resumed working. But something had shifted between them. An understanding and acknowledgement of what was growing between them. Over the following weeks, that understanding deepened. They talked more, sharing stories of their pasts, their losses, their hopes. Jim told Nalin about his parents, about his loneliness, about his dream of building a real ranch. Nalin told him about Apache customs, about her childhood, about the old ways that were disappearing. They began to trust each other, really trust each other. Jim stopped checking to make sure his guns were secure at night. Nalin started coming inside the house more often, no longer sleeping on the barn roof every single night. One night a storm rolled in, violent and sudden. Lightning split the sky and thunder shook the ground. The supplies were running low. Jim had put off the trip to town for as long as possible. But winter was approaching and they needed flour, salt, coffee, and a few tools he couldn't make himself. The nearest town, Silver Creek, was a full day's ride away. The question was whether to take Nalin with him. They discussed it over breakfast, both of them knowing this moment would come eventually. They couldn't hide forever on the ranch. Eventually they would have to face the outside world and all the judgment that would come with their unusual situation. "I should come," Nalin said firmly. "Two people safer than one on road. And I need to see this town. Understand your world better." Jim worried about how people would react. Silver Creek wasn't a big town, maybe 300 people, but it had a sheriff, a church, and plenty of opinions about how things should be. Apache attacks had happened in the area before and feelings ran strong. People might not be friendly, Jim warned. They might say things. Mean things. Nalan's expression didn't change. I hear mean things before. Words not kill me. I survive worse than words, she had a point. And Jim realized he was also curious to see how people would react. If they were going to build a life together, they couldn't hide forever. They set out early the next morning. Jim wore his good clothes and his newer hat. Nalan wore a simple dress Jim had found in a trunk, clothes that had belonged to his mother. The dress was a bit big on her, but it made her look less like an Apache warrior and more like a settler woman. She had agreed to wear it, though Jim could tell she felt uncomfortable in the unfamiliar clothing. As they rode, Jim coached her on what to expect. Stay close to me. Don't react if people stare or whisper. And if anyone asks, you're my wife. The word hung in the air between them. They had never discussed marriage officially, but it seemed like the safest explanation for townspeople. Wife, Nalan repeated, testing the word. This mean we married in white man way? Not officially, but it's what we'll tell people. It'll be easier that way. And what you tell them about me? Where I come from. Jim had thought about this. We'll say you're from New Mexico territory. That you came west after your family passed away. It's close to the truth. Nalan nodded slowly. You good at making truth sound different. This useful skill. Silver Creek appeared on the horizon around midday. It was a dusty town like hundreds of others scattered across the territory. One main street lined with buildings, a few side streets branching off, and empty land stretching in all directions. The moment they rode into town, Jim felt eyes on them. People stopped what they were doing to watch the newcomers. An old woman sweeping her porch paused mid-sweep. Two men outside the saloon turned to stare. A group of children playing in the street went quiet. Jim felt Nalan tense in the saddle behind him. He reached back and gave her hand a quick, reassuring squeeze. They headed to the general store first. Jim helped Nalan dismount and they walked inside together. The store owner, a heavy-set man named Peterson, looked up from his ledger and his eyes widened slightly. Jim Walker, Peterson said carefully. Haven't seen you in town for a while. Been busy at the ranch. This is my wife, Nalan. Peterson's gaze shifted to Nalan, taking in her dark skin, her black hair, her distinctive features. His expression flickered through several emotions, surprise, suspicion, curiosity, before settling on forced politeness. Ma'am, he said with a slight nod. Welcome to Silver Creek. Nalan nodded back but said nothing. Jim noticed her positioning herself so she could see both the door and Peterson at the same time. Old habits died hard. I need to stock up for winter, Jim said, pulling out his list. Flour, salt coffee, some nails, and wire if you have it. As Peterson gathered the supplies, two women entered the store. They were dressed in nice clothes, clearly wives of successful men. They stopped short when they saw Jim and Nalan. Why, Jim Walker, one of them said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. We heard you got married, but we didn't quite believe it. It's true, Jim said evenly. This is Nalan, my wife. The women circled closer, examining Nalan like she was a curious object. Where are you from, dear? The shorter woman asked. New Mexico, Nalan replied, her voice flat. And your people? What did your father do? Jim could see where this was going. These women weren't just being friendly. They were interrogating Nalan, trying to figure out her background. Her family has passed, Jim interrupted. It's a painful subject. Oh, how tragic, the taller woman said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe a word of it. You know, you look almost Indian. Are you part Indian? The question hung in the air like a threat. Jim felt Nalan's body tighten beside him, but to her credit, her face remained calm. My grandmother was Apache, Nalan said clearly. I'm not ashamed of this. The two women exchanged meaningful glances. The shorter one leaned in conspiratorially toward Jim. You poor dear. Don't you worry. We understand how lonely it gets out on those ranches. But bringing a woman like this into town, well, people will talk. Let them talk, Jim said firmly. Nalan is my wife, and I'd appreciate it if people would treat her with respect. Of course, the taller woman said quickly. We meant no offense. It's just that these are difficult times. With all the Indian troubles, people are on edge. Nalan isn't causing any trouble, Jim said, his patience wearing thin. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have shopping to finish. The women left in a flutter of skirts and whispers. Peterson finished gathering the supplies and Jim paid. trying to ignore the uncomfortable silence that had settled over the store. Outside, more people had gathered, word spreading quickly through the small town. An older man with a badge, the sheriff, approached them. "Jim Walker," the sheriff said, "need to have a word with you." Jim's stomach dropped, but he kept his expression neutral. "Sure, Sheriff Davis, what about?" The sheriff glanced at Nayland, then back at Jim. "Heard you got yourself an Indian wife. That true?" "She's part Apache, yes." "Is that against the law?" "No, not against the law exactly. But we've had trouble with Apaches lately. Raids on ranches north of here. Some folks are nervous about having them in town." "Nayland hasn't raided anyone," Jim said firmly. "She's been living peacefully on my ranch for months now." "I'm sure she has," the sheriff said, though his tone suggested doubt. "But you understand the situation. Tensions are high. Maybe it would be better if she waited outside of town while you did your business?" "No," Jim said flatly. "She's my wife. She stays with me." The sheriff's expression hardened. "Now listen here, Walker. I'm trying to be reasonable, but if there's trouble, if someone recognizes her, or if things get ugly, I can't guarantee her safety." "Is that a threat, Sheriff?" "It's a warning. There are men in this town who've lost family to Apache raids. They see an Apache woman walking around free, it stirs up bad feelings." Before Jim could respond, a voice called out from across the street. "That's her. That's the Apache warrior." Jim's blood ran cold. He turned to see a group of men gathering, and among them was the cavalry captain from the pass, the one Jim had lied to months ago. The captain strode forward, his face red with anger. "I knew something was wrong when I saw you in that pass. This woman is an Apache warrior. I saw her with my own eyes." "She's my wife," Jim insisted, but his voice sounded weak even to his own ears. "Your wife?" The captain laughed bitterly. "You're harboring an enemy combatant. That's treason." More people were gathering now, forming a crowd. Jim could feel the mood turning ugly. Some faces showed simple curiosity, but others showed anger and fear. Nayland stepped forward, her head held high. "I am Apache," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the crowd. "I was warrior, this true, but I not fight anymore. I live with Jim Walker. I work his ranch. I break no laws. You attacked settlers," someone shouted from the crowd. "You killed innocent people," another voice added. "I defend my people when they attacked," Nayland shot back, her voice sharp. "Same as you defend yours. War is war. Both sides kill. Both sides lose." The sheriff stepped between Nayland and the angry crowd. "Everyone calm down. Let's not do something we'll regret." But the captain wasn't backing down. "She needs to be arrested. Taken to the fort for questioning." "On what charges?" the sheriff asked. Being Apache is charge enough in these times. Jim's hand moved to his gun, not drawing it but making it clear he was prepared to defend Nayland. "She's done nothing wrong. She's lived peacefully for months. If you try to take her, you'll have to go through me." The tension stretched like a wire pulled too tight. The crowd seemed ready to explode into violence. Jim counted the odds and knew they were bad. But he wasn't backing down. He had made a promise to protect Nayland, and he would keep it no matter what. Then, unexpectedly, a new voice cut through the tension. "That's enough." An elderly man pushed through the crowd. Jim recognized him as Reverend Thompson, the town preacher. He was respected in Silver Creek, one of the few people whose opinion carried real weight. "This woman has done nothing to harm anyone in this town," Reverend Thompson said firmly. "She has lived peacefully with her husband. That should be enough. Or have we forgotten what the good book says about judging others?" "But Reverend," the captain protested, "she's Apache." "She's the enemy." "She was Apache," the Reverend corrected. "Now she's a woman trying to build a new life. And from what I understand, she's been working honestly, causing no trouble." The confrontation in Silver Creek changed something between Jim and Nayland. Before, they had been two people sharing space, learning to coexist. After, they became partners with a shared purpose. The world had tried to tear them apart, and they had refused to let it happen. A week after their trip to town, Jim woke to find Nayland already up and dressed. But instead of heading out to work, she stood by the window looking thoughtful. "Something wrong?" Jim asked, pulling on his boots. "I've been thinking," Nayland said slowly, "about what those people say about us. If we're going to build real life together, we should do it right. White man way. We should marry. Proper wedding." Jim stood up, surprised. "You want to get married?" "Officially? People already call me your wife." but is not real, not in eyes of your law, your God. I want to make it real. Show everyone we serious. Show them we not hiding or ashamed. Jim walked over to her, studying her face. Are you sure? It would mean giving up any chance of going back to your people. Once you marry me, you would be fully part of my world. I already part of your world, Nolan replied. And I already cannot go back. My people see me living here, they think I traitor. Your people see me, they think I enemy. We make our own world, you and me, but we make it proper. Jim felt a smile spreading across his face. Then yes, let's get married. Really married. They rode back to Silver Creek 2 weeks later, early on a Sunday morning. This time, Jim had sent word ahead to Reverend Thompson, explaining their intentions. The Reverend had agreed to perform the ceremony, though he warned it might not be well attended. That turned out to be an understatement. When they arrived at the small church, only a handful of people were there. Reverend Thompson stood at the altar, and beside him was his wife. That was it. No guests, no celebration, no community support. But Jim and Nolan didn't care. They stood before the Reverend, holding hands, and spoke their vows. Jim promised to honor and protect Nolan, to treat her as an equal partner, to build a life with her. Nolan promised the same, adding her own Apache words that the Reverend didn't understand but respected anyway. When it was done, Reverend Thompson smiled warmly. I now pronounce you husband and wife. May God bless your union and grant you peace. His wife stepped forward with a small gift, a hand-stitched quilt. Every marriage needs a little warmth, she said kindly. Welcome to the community, child. Don't let the others discourage you. There are good people here, even if they're scared right now. Jim and Nolan thanked them both and rode home as the sun climbed higher in the sky. Now they were truly married, bound together not just by promise but by law and ceremony. That winter proved to be one of the coldest on record. Snow fell heavy and often, piling up against the sides of the ranch house. But inside, with a good fire burning and plenty of food stored away, Jim and Nolan found an unexpected happiness. Nolan transformed the house into a real home. She made curtains from old fabric, wove new baskets for storage, and created decorations that blended Apache and settler styles. She taught Jim how to make jerky that stayed good for months and how to cook traditional Apache dishes using local ingredients. Jim taught her to read and write English better. They would sit by the fire in the evenings, Jim pointing out letters in an old newspaper, Nolan practicing her writing on scraps of paper. She learned quickly, her sharp mind absorbing everything. Why you never read before? Jim asked one night. Apache not use writing like white man, Nolan explained. We keep history and stories in memory. Elders teach young ones by speaking, not by books. But now I see writing is useful. Help me understand contracts, prices, your laws. Make me stronger in this world. They worked together to improve the ranch. Nolan suggested building a stone wall around part of the property to protect against flooding. She showed Jim how to read animal tracks to know when predators were near the livestock. Her knowledge combined with his created something better than either could have achieved alone. One evening in late winter, Nolan told Jim she was pregnant. He was checking his saddle gear when she spoke, her voice quiet but firm. Jim, I carrying child. Your son, maybe. Or daughter. Jim dropped the saddle strap he had been adjusting. He turned to face her, his mind racing. Are you sure? Yes, I know signs. Baby come in summer, I think. Joy flooded through Jim, mixed with fear and excitement and 1,000 other emotions. He crossed the room and pulled Nolan into his arms. This is wonderful, amazing. We're going to be parents. Nolan hugged him back, but he could feel tension in her body. I worried, she admitted. Last time Apache woman marry white man in Silver Creek. People not accept child. They say child don't belong anywhere. Not Apache, not white. Our child will belong with us, Jim said firmly. We'll make sure of that. But Nolan's worry stayed with her. As her belly grew through the spring, she became more cautious, more protective. She stopped riding into town completely, preferring to stay at the ranch where she felt safe. Jim understood. He had seen the looks people gave them, heard the whispers. Some folks thought their marriage was an insult to the settlers who had died in Apache raids. Others thought Nolan was betraying her own people. Everyone had an opinion, and none of them were particularly kind. But there were small kindnesses too. Reverend Thompson and his wife visited several times, bringing gifts for the coming baby. A neighboring rancher named Old Pete, who lived 2 days' ride away, stopped by one day with a carved wooden cradle. Made this for my own kids long time ago, Pete said gruffly. They're all grown now. Figured you could use it? These moments of acceptance meant more than Jim could express. They proved that not everyone was against them, that some people could see past fear and prejudice to recognize two people trying to build a life together. As Nolan's pregnancy progressed, she taught Jim about Apache traditions for childbirth. She gathered special herbs and made preparations, explaining each step. Jim listened carefully, wanting to understand her ways, wanting to honor where she came from. One afternoon in late spring, they were working in the garden when they heard horses approaching. Jim's hand went to his gun, but Nolan touched his arm. "Wait," she said. "I recognize horses." 3 Apache warriors rode into view. They were painted for war, armed with rifles and traditional weapons. Jim felt his heart start pounding, but Nolan stepped forward calmly. She spoke to them in Apache, her words quick and firm. The warriors responded, their faces serious. Jim couldn't understand what they were saying, but he could read the body language. This was a negotiation, maybe even a confrontation. Finally, one of the warriors pointed at Nolan's pregnant belly and said something that made her stiffen. She replied sharply, her hand moving to rest protectively over her stomach. The warriors seemed to consider this. They spoke among themselves, then turned their horses and rode away without another word. What was that about? Jim asked once they were gone. They come to see if stories are true. If I really marry white man really carrying his child? Nolan's voice was tight with emotion. They say I betray Apache people. I tell them I survive. I make choice to live instead of die. I tell them child will know Apache ways, will remember where mother come from. What did they say to that? They say I dead to them. No longer Apache. But they not hurt me, not hurt you, not hurt child. They give us that much respect. She touched her belly gently. Is enough. We not need them. We have each other. But Jim could see the pain in her eyes. Being rejected by her people hurt, even if she had expected it. He put his arm around her shoulders and they stood together looking out at the land they were building their life on. Our child will be loved, Jim said quietly. That's what matters. We'll teach them the best of both worlds. Apache strength and wisdom, settler determination and skills. They'll be stronger for having both. Nolan leaned against him. You good man, Jim Walker. You give me life when I'm ready to die. You give me home when I have nothing. You give me family again. I not forget this ever. As spring turned to summer, they prepared for the baby's arrival. Jim rode to Silver Creek one last time to buy supplies, medicine, cloth for diapers. The trip was tense. People stared at him with a mixture of curiosity and judgment, wondering how the Apache woman's pregnancy was going, speculating about what the child would be like. Jim ignored them all. He bought what he needed and rode home quickly, eager to get back to Nolan. When he arrived, he found her sitting outside in the evening sun, one hand on her large belly, singing softly in Apache. It was a lullaby, she told him later, one her mother had sung to her. Baby moving, she said with a smile, very active. I think strong child. Strong like promise I make to you in Apache Pass. Jim sat beside her, placing his hand next to hers on her belly. He felt a kick, strong and sure, and laughed with delight. Strong indeed, he agreed, just like their mother. They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors. Two people from different worlds, bound together by choice and promise and love. They had faced judgment, rejection, and danger. They had built a home from nothing, created a partnership that defied everyone's expectations. Now they were about to become parents, to bring a new life into their complicated world. It was terrifying and exciting and full of possibility. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Nolan closed her eyes and breathed it in, content. This was her home now. The storm came without warning, rolling across the Arizona territory like a living thing. Dark clouds gathered in the afternoon, turning the sky almost black. Lightning split the darkness with brilliant white cracks, and thunder shook the ground like the footsteps of giants. Jim was out checking the cattle when the first drops fell. He rode hard for home, worried about Nolan. She was due to give birth any day now, and he didn't want to be away from her when it happened. When he burst through the door, drenched and breathing hard, he found Nolan standing in the middle of the room, one hand braced against the table, the other pressed to her belly. Her face was tight with pain. It's time, she said simply. Jim felt his heart leap into his throat. Now, right now. Babies come when they're ready, not when we want them to. Despite the pain, there was a hint of amusement in her voice. You panic like new father is good. Means you care. Of course I care. What do I do? Should I ride for the doctor? No time. And I not want white doctor touching me. She breathed through another contraction, her jaw clenched. I show you what to do. But first boil water. Lots of water. And get clean cloth, the ones I prepare. Jim sprang into action, grateful to have something to do. His hands shook as he built up the fire and set pots of water to boil. Outside, the storm intensified. Rain hammered against the roof and walls. Lightning flashed so bright it lit up the room like daylight. Nalin moved to the bed slowly and carefully. Jim helped her, supporting her weight, his heart pounding with fear and excitement. I seen many births in Apache camp, Nalin said, her voice strained but steady. Women very strong. They push baby out and next day they working again. I do same, but I need you be strong too. No fainting, no screaming. Just help when I tell you. I won't faint, Jim promised, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. The hours that followed were the longest of Jim's life. The storm raged outside while Nalin labored inside, her face shining with sweat, her body working to bring new life into the world. Jim stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, fetching water and cloth as she directed. She was incredibly strong. She didn't scream or cry out, even when the pain was clearly overwhelming. Instead, she breathed deeply, making low sounds that reminded Jim of chanting or prayer. She was calling on some inner strength, some Apache warrior spirit that had helped her survive everything else. Tell me about the baby, Jim said, during a brief rest between contractions. What will we name them? If boy, I want call him what my people would call. Name that means standing between worlds, because he will be Apache and white man. He will walk between both. And what would that be in English? I think standing between worlds is good name. But you call him something else too. Give him white name for when he need it. Jim thought for a moment. What about calling him that in Apache but using a short name day today? What if we call him Ben, Benjamin Standing Between Worlds Walker? Nalin smiled despite her pain. Is good name, strong name. And if girl? What would you want? Girl name is she who chooses her path. In Apache is beautiful name. In English, maybe just call her Grace. Grace who chooses her path walker. Grace is perfect, Jim agreed. Another contraction hit, harder than before. Nalin gripped Jim's hand so tight he thought his bones might break, but he didn't pull away. He stayed with her, murmuring encouragement, being the anchor she needed. Outside, the storm reached its peak. Thunder crashed so loud it seemed the world was ending. Rain pounded down in sheets. Lightning struck somewhere close, and Jim smelled the sharp scent of burning wood. And in that moment of chaos, between one thunderclap and the next, Nalin gave one final push and their baby entered the world. The cry that filled the room was small but fierce, cutting through the sound of the storm. Jim watched in amazement as Nalin, exhausted and shaking, reached for the baby. He helped her, his hands clumsy but gentle, and together they brought the child to her chest. Boy, Nalin said, her voice thick with emotion. We have son, strong son like I promise. Jim looked down at his son, this tiny perfect person who hadn't existed an hour ago and now was the center of his entire world. The baby had a full head of dark hair, dark eyes that seemed to already be looking around, and tiny fists that waved in the air. Ben, Jim whispered. Benjamin Standing Between Worlds Walker. Welcome to the world, son. Tears ran down his face and he didn't bother to wipe them away. He had never felt anything like this before. This overwhelming love, this fierce protective instinct, this sense that his life had just changed forever in the most important way possible. Nalin looked up at him, and he saw the same emotions reflected in her eyes. She was exhausted, her hair tangled and damp with sweat, but she had never looked more beautiful to him. We did it, she said softly. We make family. We keep promise. Jim leaned down and kissed her forehead. You did it. You're amazing. You're the strongest person I've ever met. They spent the rest of the night together, the three of them, as the storm slowly passed. Jim helped Nalin clean up and get comfortable. He learned how to hold his son properly, how to support the tiny head, how to recognize when the baby was hungry or tired. Ben nursed eagerly, and Nalin sang to him in Apache, the same lullaby she had been singing for weeks. Jim sat beside them, watching his wife and son, feeling like the luckiest man alive. As dawn broke, the storm finally ended. Jim opened the door to find the world washed clean. everything sparkling in the early morning light. The air smelled fresh and new like anything was possible. But that feeling of peace didn't last long. Around noon, Jim heard horses approaching. He looked out the window and felt his stomach drop. It was a cavalry patrol, and leading it was the same captain who had confronted them in Silver Creek months ago. Jim stepped outside, closing the door behind him to keep the soldiers away from Nalin and the baby. "Captain," he said, trying to keep his voice neutral. The captain dismounted, his face serious. "Walker, we heard you had a child." "An Apache child. A son," Jim corrected. "My son. Born last night. Born to an Apache woman who used to be a warrior." The captain's eyes were cold. "That makes the child dangerous. Apache blood runs strong. Who knows what that boy might become?" Jim felt anger rising in his chest. "He's 1 day old. He's not dangerous. He's a baby. Today he's a baby. Tomorrow he could be leading raids against settlers." The captain looked past Jim toward the house. "I'm here to inform you that the fort is keeping records of all Apache children born in the territory. We need to know where they are, who they're with. You want to spy on my son? We want to protect American citizens. Your boy has Apache blood. That makes him a potential threat. He's also my son, which makes him an American citizen too." Jim stepped forward, his jaw tight. "You're not taking him anywhere. You're not putting him on any list. He's going to grow up here on this ranch as my son. That's all anyone needs to know." The captain stared at him for a long moment. Finally, he nodded slowly. "Fine, but understand this, Walker. If there's any trouble, any hint that your wife is in contact with hostile Apaches or that your son shows signs of aggression toward settlers, we will intervene. The government has a long memory, and we don't forget where threats come from. The only threat here is you threatening my family," Jim said coldly. The captain remounted his horse. "I hope you know what you're doing, Walker. That boy is going to face a hard life. Apache and white don't mix well. He'll always be caught between worlds, never fully accepted by either side." After the soldiers left, Jim stood outside for a long time, his hands shaking with anger and fear. The captain's words echoed in his mind. What kind of life would Ben have? Would he really be rejected by both cultures? Would he always be seen as a threat, as something dangerous? When he finally went back inside, Nalin was awake, nursing Ben. She looked at Jim's face and knew immediately that something had happened. "Soldiers?" she asked. Jim nodded. "The captain. He wanted to register Ben on some kind of list. Apache children they're tracking." Nalin's expression darkened. "They fear what they not understand. They see Apache child, they think enemy. They not see innocent baby who done nothing wrong. He said Ben would have a hard life, that he'd never be accepted." "He probably right," Nalin said honestly. "But that not mean Ben's life will be bad life. Hard, yes, but hard not same as bad. We teach him to be strong. We teach him to be proud of who he is, both Apache and white. We teach him that he not need everyone's acceptance to be worthy." Jim sat beside her, looking down at their sleeping son. "How did you get so wise?" "I survived many hard things. I learned that what other people think not as important as what you know in your heart." She shifted Ben gently in her arms. "This boy, he going to be something special. I feel it. He have strength of Apache and determination of Cowboy. He have mother who was warrior, and father who was brave enough to save enemy. He come from love, even if that love started in strange way." Jim reached out and touched Ben's tiny hand. The baby's fingers wrapped around his finger instinctively, gripping tight. "He's perfect," Jim said softly. "Yes. And we protect him. From soldiers, from judgment, from anyone who try to hurt him because of who his parents are." Nalin's voice was fierce. "I fight for him like I never fight for anything before." "We both will," Jim promised. Ben was 3 months old when the raid started. Word came from neighboring ranches that Apache warriors were attacking settlements, stealing cattle, burning buildings. The raids weren't random. They were strategic, carefully planned, hitting targets where defenses were weak. The territory erupted in fear and anger. Settlers who had been tolerating Nalin's presence suddenly saw her as a threat. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some said she was sending signals to the raiders. Others claimed she was scouting targets for them. A few even suggested that little Ben was some kind of future warrior being raised behind enemy lines. Jim heard the whispers when he went to town for supplies. People who had been merely cold before now openly glared at him. The general store owner served him but wouldn't make eye contact. Women pulled their children away when he passed. They think Nolan is involved. Old Pete warned him one day, riding out to the ranch to deliver the news. There's talk of forming a vigilante group. They're angry and scared, and they're looking for someone to blame. Naylin hasn't done anything, Jim insisted. She hasn't left the ranch since Ben was born. I know that, and you know that. But scared people don't think straight. They just want someone to punish. Pete's weathered face was grave. You need to be careful, Jim, real careful. Some of these men lost family in the raids. They're out for blood. After Pete left, Jim told Naylin what he had learned. She listened calmly, nursing Ben, her face showing little emotion. But Jim could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand moved unconsciously to check that her knife was nearby. I know this would come, she said quietly. Apache raid, white people blame all Apache. Not care if guilty or not. Just see Apache face and want revenge. What do? We prepare. Check weapons. Make sure we have supplies to hold out if we need to. And we not go to town. Too dangerous now. That night, they reinforced the doors and windows of the ranch house. Jim cleaned his rifles and checked his ammunition. Naylin sharpened her knives and made sure her bow was in good condition. They didn't speak much. Both of them focused on preparation. Both of them trying not to think about what might happen. 3 days later, the mob came. It was late afternoon when Jim spotted the dust cloud on the horizon. At least 20 riders, maybe more, heading straight for the ranch. He called to Naylin, and she came running with Ben in her arms. Take him to the cellar, Jim said urgently. Hide there and don't come out unless I call for you. No, I fight beside you. Naylin, please. If something happens to me, Ben needs you alive. Hide with him, please. She wanted to argue, he could see it in her eyes. But she looked down at their son and nodded. You call for me if you need help. I not let you face this alone if I can help. Jim watched her disappear into the house, then took up position on the porch with his rifle. His heart pounded as the riders drew closer. He recognized some faces from Silver Creek. The blacksmith, a few ranch hands, some farmers. At their head rode a man named Carson, who had lost his brother in a recent raid. They pulled up about 50 yards from the house, spreading out in a semicircle. Carson rode forward a few more paces, his face hard with anger and grief. Walker, he called out. We need to talk about your wife. She's done nothing wrong, Jim called back, his rifle held ready but not aimed at anyone yet. The raids started after you brought her here. That's not coincidence. It's completely coincidence. Naylin hasn't left this ranch. She's been here taking care of our son. Or she's been sending signals. Smoke signals, mirror flashes. Everyone knows Apache can communicate across long distances. She hasn't sent any signals. I've been with her every day, another man spoke up. How do we know you're not helping her? Maybe you've turned traitor too. The accusation stung, but Jim kept his voice steady. I'm no traitor. I'm just a rancher trying to protect his family. Carson leaned forward in his saddle. Then let us search the place. If she's innocent, you've got nothing to hide. You're not searching my home. You've got no authority and no warrant. We don't need a warrant. This is about protecting our families, our land. That Apache woman is a danger to everyone in this territory. Her name is Naylin, Jim said firmly. She's my wife. She's the mother of my child. And I won't let you hurt her. The men began to dismount, clearly planning to search the ranch by force if necessary. Jim's finger moved to the trigger of his rifle. I'm warning you, he said loudly. The first man who steps onto my property without permission gets shot. I'm within my rights to defend my home. You're going to shoot your neighbors? Carson asked. Good, honest men who are just trying to keep their families safe. I'm going to defend my wife from a mob. That's what any husband would do. The tension stretched tight. Several of the men had drawn their guns now. Jim calculated his chances and knew they were terrible. He might get 2 or 3 shots off before they rushed him. He would probably die. But maybe, just maybe, it would give Naylin enough time to escape with Ben. Then, unexpectedly, the door behind Jim opened. No, he hissed. But Naylin ignored him. She stepped out onto the porch, holding Ben in her arms. She had changed into her traditional Apache clothing, the warrior's dress she had worn the day they met. Her head was high, her eyes fearless. I am Naylin, she announced, her voice carrying across the distance. Apache woman, warrior, you want to search for traitor? Search me, look in my eyes, see if I lie. The mob fell silent, surprised by her sudden appearance. Carson stared at her, at the baby in her arms. You've been sending signals, he accused, but his voice was less certain now. I send no signals. I not speak to my people since I come here. They think I traitor for marrying white man. White people think me traitor for being Apache. Everyone think I traitor. But I just woman trying to raise son in peace. How do we know you're telling the truth? Nalin's eyes blazed. You want truth? I tell you truth. Yes, Apache warriors raid your ranches. They angry. They losing land, losing people, losing everything. They fight because they have nothing left to lose. This is truth. But I not part of their fight anymore. I choose different path. I choose to survive by making peace, not war. One of the younger men in the mob spoke up. But you were a warrior. You killed settlers. Yes, I fight in war. I kill enemies, same as your soldiers kill my people. This is what war is. Both sides kill, both sides suffer. She paused, then continued more softly. My father die in war. My mother die. My brothers die. Everyone I love dead. So I ask myself, what point of more killing? What point of more dying? I choose to stop. I choose to live instead. She held Ben up slightly so everyone could see him. This boy is my son. He half Apache, half white. He not belong to either world completely. But maybe this good thing. Maybe he can be bridge between worlds. Maybe he can help people see we not so different. We all want same things. We want live in peace, raise families, have enough to eat. Carson stared at her for a long moment. My brother died in a raid last month. He had a wife and 3 children. How do I forgive that? I not ask you forgive. I not responsible for your brother's death. But I sorry for your loss. I know that pain. I feel it too when I lose my family. Nalin's voice was steady but full of emotion. But killing me not bring your brother back. Hurting my family not heal your family. It just make more pain, more anger, more death. One of the older men in the mob, a farmer Jim recognized from town, lowered his gun. She's got a point, Carson. This ain't right coming here like this. She's just a woman with a baby. She's Apache, Carson insisted, but his voice lacked conviction now. She's a mother, the farmer replied. Same as my wife, same as yours. Look at her. She ain't sending signals or plotting raids. She's trying to protect her child. More men began to lower their weapons. The energy of the mob was dissipating, uncertainty replacing anger. They had come expecting to find a dangerous enemy. Instead, they found a woman with a baby, speaking honestly about loss and survival. Nalin continued, sensing the shift. I make promise to Jim Walker in Apache Pass. I tell him I give him strong sons if he spare my life. He spare me, so I keep promise. But somewhere between promise and now, something change. I not just keep promise anymore. I choose to be here. I choose to love this man. I choose to be mother to this child. This my choice, my life. She looked directly at Carson. You lost brother. This terrible thing. But you not lose brother because of me. You lose him because there is war. War that started long before I born. War that continue because both sides too angry to stop. I choose to stop. I choose peace. If you kill me today, it not stop war. It just make war continue. Maybe my son grow up angry, want revenge for his mother. Maybe other Apache see what happened to me and become more angry. You start new cycle of violence. The silence that followed was heavy. Jim could see the men struggling with her words, with their anger and their grief and their fear. Finally, Carson dismounted and walked closer, stopping at the edge of the porch. He looked at Nalin, really looked at her, seeing her not as an enemy but as a person. Then he looked at Ben, the tiny baby who watched the world with curious eyes. I don't like this, Carson said slowly. I don't like having Apache living among us. But maybe you're right. Maybe more killing isn't the answer. He looked at Jim. Keep her close. Keep her out of town. And if there's even a hint she's involved with the raiders, we'll be back. 15 years passed. 15 years of hard work, challenges, small victories, and quiet moments of happiness. The ranch that Jim and Nalin built together grew into something substantial. More land, more cattle, better buildings. But more importantly, they built something else. A family, a legacy, a living example that 2 worlds could exist together. Ben was no longer a baby but a strong young man of 15. He was tall and lean, with his mother's dark hair and eyes but his father's lighter skin. He could ride better than most cowboys in the territory, track like an Apache warrior and speak both English and Apache fluently. He was exactly what Nalin had predicted, standing between worlds, belonging fully to neither but taking the best from both. He had 2 younger brothers now. Thomas, who was 12 and had his father's stubborn determination, and little David, just 8 years old, who looked more Apache than his brothers and had inherited his mother's fierce intelligence. The boys were a handful. They fought and played and explored the land around the ranch with endless energy. Jim and Nalin raised them with a unique combination of Apache and settler traditions. The boys learned to hunt with both rifles and bows. They studied reading and writing from Jim and traditional stories from Nalin. They attended church sometimes, but also learned Apache prayers and ceremonies. It wasn't always easy. The boys faced questions and sometimes cruelty from other children. They were called mixed breeds, half-breeds, words meant to hurt and diminish. But Jim and Nalin taught them to be proud of who they were, to see their heritage as strength rather than weakness. One evening, Ben came home with a bloody nose and split lip. He had been in town with Jim and some boys had started trouble. When Jim tried to intervene, Ben had stopped him. "I handle it myself, Pa," Ben said, cleaning his face. "They called Ma some names. Said she was a savage. I couldn't let that stand." Nalin looked at her eldest son with a mixture of pride and concern. "Fighting not always answer." "But sometimes it is," Ben replied, echoing words she had told him when he was younger. "You taught me that. You said Apache warrior knows when to fight and when to make peace." "This was time to fight," Jim sighed. "Did you win at least?" Ben grinned despite his injuries. "Yes, sir. 3 against 1, but I won. Tommy helped, though. He jumped in when one of them grabbed me from behind." "That, my boys," Nalin said, trying to hide her smile. "Always stick together." The ranch had become something unexpected over the years. Word had spread about the Apache woman and the cowboy who ran an honest operation. Some people stayed away, still uncomfortable with the mixed family, but others came specifically because of Nalin's presence. Apache families who were trying to adapt to reservation life sometimes stopped by, seeking advice or just to see one of their own living successfully in the white world. Nalin fed them, talked with them, shared what she had learned. She became a bridge, just as she had hoped Ben would be, helping people understand each other. Settlers who needed help with horses or tracking or understanding the land also came to the ranch. Nalin's skills were too valuable to ignore, and gradually people began to see past her heritage to recognize her knowledge and abilities. Old Pete, now very old indeed, still visited regularly. He had become like a grandfather to the boys, teaching them practical skills and telling them stories about the early days of the territory. "Your Ma and Pa did something special here," he told the boys one afternoon. "They showed people that different don't mean bad. They proved that families can be built from love, not just from looking the same or coming from the same place." The boys soaked up these lessons, understanding on some level that their family was unusual and important. They carried themselves with a quiet pride that came from knowing they were loved and valued, despite what the outside world sometimes said. Reverend Thompson and his wife had become genuine friends. They visited often, and the Reverend sometimes pointed to Jim and Nalin's family as an example in his sermons. Not everyone in the congregation appreciated it, but enough people did that slowly. Attitudes began to shift. Jim had grown grayer over the years, his face more weathered by sun and wind. But he was healthy and strong, still capable of a full day's work. He looked at his 3 sons and his wife with a satisfaction that went deeper than words. Nalin had changed too. She wore settler clothes most of the time now, though she kept her traditional dresses for special occasions. Her English was perfect with barely a trace of an accent. But she made sure her sons knew Apache language and customs, teaching them the old ways even as they learned to live in the new world. One spring day, a group of Apache warriors appeared on the horizon. Jim's first instinct was alarm, but Nalin touched his arm. "Is okay," she said quietly. "I know one of them. My cousin's son. They come in peace." The warriors rode up slowly, making no threatening moves. The leader, a young man about Ben's age, spoke to Nalin in Apache. She responded, gesturing to her family, to the ranch, explaining her life. The young warriors looked around with curious eyes. They saw the well-kept buildings, the healthy cattle, the 3 strong boys who watched them with interest and no fear. Finally, the leader spoke in broken English. "You live well here. Better than on reservation?" "Yes," Nalin agreed. "But I work hard for this. And I give up much to have it." "You give up being Apache?" "No." Nalin's voice was firm. "I never give up being Apache. I just become more than only Apache. I'm Apache and settler wife. Apache and mother. Apache and rancher. I am many things, not just one. The young warrior considered this. Our elders say you are lost to us, but I see you are not lost. You are just found in different place. They shared a meal with the Apache warriors, Nalan cooking traditional foods she had not made in years. The boys listened eagerly as the warriors told stories about life on the reservation, about the struggles and the small victories. When the warriors left, Ben stood watching them ride away. "Ma," he asked quietly, "do you ever wish you had stayed with your people?" Nalan put her arm around her tall son. "Sometimes I miss old ways, miss speaking Apache every day, miss ceremonies and traditions, but I not regret choice I make. I choose life over death. I choose your father, choose you and your brothers. This was right choice for me. Do you think we'll ever be fully accepted, either by the Apache or by the white settlers?" "Maybe not in our lifetime," Nalan said honestly. "But you boys, you show people different way is possible. You are proof that Apache and white can not just live together, but create something good together. Your children will have easier time, and their children will have even easier time. This is how change happens, slowly, generation by generation." As more years passed, the ranch became known throughout the territory as neutral ground. When conflicts arose between Apache and settlers, people sometimes came to Jim and Nalan for mediation. They would sit with both sides, translate not just language but culture and intent, helping people find common ground. It was exhausting work, often thankless, but it was important. Every conflict they helped resolve without violence was a small victory. Every person whose mind they changed was a step toward a more peaceful future. Thomas grew into a skilled horseman who dreamed of raising and training horses professionally. David showed an aptitude for medicine, fascinated by the healing herbs Nalan taught him about and the books on anatomy Jim bought for him. And Ben, the eldest, became a leader among young people in the territory, respected by both Apache and settler youth for his fair-mindedness and strength. When Ben turned 18, he announced his intention to start his own ranch, not far from his parents' land. He wanted to continue the work they had started, showing that different cultures could live in harmony. "You raised me to build bridges," he told Jim and Nalan. "That's what I want to do with my life, show people what you showed me." Nalan embraced her son, tears streaming down her face. "You make me so proud. You everything I hope for when I make promise to your father in Apache Pass all those years ago. I promise him strong sons. But you are more than strong. You are wise, kind, brave. You are best of both worlds." Jim shook his son's hand, then pulled him into a hug. "Your mother saved my life the day she made that promise. But she saved it in more ways than one. She gave me purpose, family, love. Everything good in my life came from the choice I made to spare her. You boys are the proof of that." On the evening of Ben's departure to start his new ranch, the whole family gathered outside to watch the sunset. It had become their tradition over the years, this quiet time together at the end of the day. The land stretched out before them, painted in shades of gold and orange by the setting sun. This harsh, beautiful territory that had brought Jim and Nalan together all those years ago. The land that had tested them, challenged them, but ultimately allowed them to thrive. "Tell us the story again, Ma," little David said, as he always did. "About how you and Pa met." Nalan smiled. She had told this story hundreds of times, but it never got old. "I was warrior woman," she began. "Alone, angry, ready to die fighting. I ambush your father in Apache Pass. We fight hard, but he win. He pinned me down, could kill me easy. But I look in his eyes and I see something. Not hate, not fear. Just wondering what to do." "And you made him a promise," Thomas added, knowing the story by heart. "Yes. I tell him, don't kill me, Cowboy. I give you strong sons. I think he